I never told my grandfather I found his war journal because it was hidden behind a false drawer and filled with names he never spoke of. When he held my son for the first time and said, "We start fresh with them," I knew I had to let his silence speak louder than any of my questions. A few years ago, my grandfather fell and broke his hip. He was 87. Still sharp, but his body had slowed down more than he liked to admit. My mom moved him into a short-term rehab facility while we cleaned up the house for when he got back. She mostly needed help clearing the study upstairs, so I went over on a Saturday afternoon to start. The study hadn't been touched in years. I remember being a kid and sneaking in there while he read the paper. He'd wave me off with a grunt if I made too much noise. But after my grandmother died, he stopped going in. The door stayed shut. Dust collected on everything. I started with the shelves, tossing out old newspapers and dog-eared almanacs. I opened the windows to air the place out, then moved to the big desk in the corner. This heavy, dark oak thing with thick legs and brass handles. I figured I'd empty out the drawers and maybe vacuum under it. That's when I noticed the top right drawer wouldn't open all the way. I tugged gently. Nothing. Pulled harder. Still stuck. I crouched down and looked inside. It didn't seem blocked. I tried again, this time pulling up slightly as I yanked. It came loose with a pop, almost like a click. I pulled the whole drawer out and set it on the desk. That's when I noticed it felt heavier than it should. The inside looked normal at first. Pens, a few rubber bands, some old receipts folded so many times they looked like tissue. But then I tapped the bottom. It didn't sound like the other drawers. It had this dull, double thud. I pressed my fingers along the inside and felt a tiny indentation along the back panel. It slid open. Behind it was a thin, leather-bound notebook, tied with a black ribbon. It looked old, too neat and clean to be tossed in with random desk junk. I just stared at it. My grandfather wasn't the sentimental type. He didn't keep keepsakes or mementos. His medals were in a dusty shoebox in the attic. He never spoke about the war, and he didn't have any pictures from that time. Even my mom only knew that he'd served in Korea, and that was it. But here was this hidden. I untied the ribbon. The leather creaked a little. The first page just had a name and a date, November 3rd, 1951. It was his handwriting. Tighter, neater than I expected. The tone was cold, direct. Each entry had a date, a location, and a list of names. Sometimes a short line next to them, transferred, didn't make it, kept the photo. Some names were circled. Some were just scratched out completely. There was one entry without a date that stuck with me. I said no. I meant it. I wouldn't do it. They told me we were protecting something. I said we were just forgetting who we were. They said if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So I wrote it down. And I buried it. After that, there were several blank pages. Then the journal continued, but the tone shifted. The writing was sharper, shorter, more detached. There were foreign names too. Names that didn't look American. Some were written in a different ink, almost like they were added later. A few had what looked like coordinates next to them. One name was underlined 3 times. No note, no context. It was my name, full name, same spelling. No one else in the family shared it. Just me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the journal, tied the ribbon again, slid it back behind the false panel, and reassembled the drawer like nothing happened. I never told anyone. When he came home from rehab, I watched him closer. He moved slower, like his body had finally convinced his mind to stop fighting. But his eyes were the same. Sharp. Always watching. When I brought my newborn son over to meet him, his first great-grandchild, he didn't say much at first. He just reached out with those rough, bony hands and held the baby like something fragile he'd never seen before. He looked down at him for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up at me. His voice was quiet, and I remember every word. We start fresh with them. That was it. He handed my son back and leaned into his chair. He didn't speak much the rest of the visit. I went back into the study a few nights later. I don't know why. I think I wanted to look at the journal again to see if I imagined it. But it was still there. Same pages. Same words. Same name underlined 3 times. I sat on the floor for a while and thought about what it meant. Why my name? Why the secrecy? Why that one line? They said if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Maybe he saw something, or did something, or refused to. Maybe the journal was proof of that refusal. He never brought it up. Not once. And I never asked. Some part of me thinks he wanted it to be found, but not discussed. Like he needed to leave it behind, but didn't want it erased. He didn't burn it. Didn't destroy it. Just hid it deep enough that only someone looking closely would find it. And I did. A few weeks after that visit, my grandfather had another fall. This one was worse. He hit his head hard. They called it a subdural hematoma. He went into the hospital and didn't wake up for almost 2 days. When he finally did, he wasn't the same. Confused. Slurring words. Sometimes he thought I was his brother. Sometimes he just stared at me, silent. One time, he looked at me and said, "Tell him I didn't break." That was all. Then he closed his eyes and wouldn't speak for the rest of the day. I didn't ask who him was. After that, I started going to the study more often. Not to read the journal again, I just sat there. Sometimes I'd pull open the drawer, slide the false panel, and hold the journal for a minute. Then I'd put it back. It became a routine. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone. It was mine now. Not because I wanted it, but because it had me. Then one day, while going through some boxes in the closet, I found something else. A locked tin box. Heavy. No key. I recognized it. He used to keep it under his bed when I was a kid. I'd forgotten all about it. I took it to a locksmith downtown. Told him it was my late grandfather's and we didn't have the key. He opened it in 5 minutes. Inside were 5 letters still sealed. Old stamps. Thin yellow envelopes. All addressed to the same person, Lieutenant George A. Wynne. That name meant nothing to me. But it was the same name I'd seen in the journal, written in red ink, circled twice, and next to it. He knew what I wouldn't do. I took one letter home, opened it carefully. It wasn't from my grandfather. It was from someone else. Someone named CD. The letter was typed, but signed by hand. It was short, formal. It talked about an incident in the winter of 1952. Said, the record will show all parties acted within their orders, and that what was left behind would be scrubbed. The last line read, "Your refusal to sign won't change the file, but I know what you did and what you didn't." I read that sentence over and over. Something happened. Something big. And my grandfather wouldn't sign off on it. And somehow years later, someone mailed him a letter admitting it quietly, carefully, without saying too much. Why keep that? Why hide those letters? I read the others. They were all from the same person, written over the course of 6 years. One every year. Like some kind of ritual. The last one just said, "I'm out now." But I still remember the 3 names you wrote. I hope you did too. That's when I went back to the journal and checked. There were 3 names written at the end of one of the middle entries, separated from the rest. Each had a line under it. And next to one of them, in the faintest pencil, almost rubbed out, I buried the photo with him. I had no idea what it meant. But I started wondering if my name, underlined 3 times, wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a replacement. Maybe he saw something done to someone with my name. Or maybe he made a promise and giving me that name was how he remembered. 2 nights later, I was sitting in the study again, staring at the box of letters when my wife came in. She saw the journal on the desk. "What's that?" I froze. "Just some old notebook," I said. She walked over, picked it up, started to untie the ribbon. I took it from her. Too fast. Too hard. Her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" I didn't answer. She left the room without saying anything else. I sat there a long time after she closed the door. Because the truth was, I didn't know how much of this was mine to carry. But I couldn't put it down either. A few days later, I got a call from the rehab facility. My grandfather had a rough night. Confusion, yelling, tried to leave the building barefoot. They sedated him. The nurse said he kept repeating one word, Pulaski. It didn't mean anything to me at first. I figured it was a name. But when I looked it up later that night, I realized it was a town, Pulaski, Virginia. Tiny place. Population barely above 8,000. It stuck in my head. I went back to the journal and started combing through it line by line. Sure enough, buried in the middle of a longer entry was the word Pulaski, circled with a date next to it, June 1953. No other notes. Just the name and the date. I looked up everything I could. Military presence in Pulaski, any records from 1953. Nothing official. But I did find a small article from a local paper's online archive. It mentioned a fire in an abandoned building, possible ties to federal storage. The article was vague. almost like it was written not to draw attention. The building burned down. 3 people were listed as injured, but no names were given. I kept digging. That's when I found something I wasn't supposed to find. An old discussion thread on a long-dead veterans forum. It was archived, no longer active, but still visible through some obscure web cache. The thread was about classified incidents that never got a report number. One user, anonymous, had posted a long paragraph referencing Pulaski, 1953. He didn't give details, but he wrote, "Some of us were told to forget fast. The ones who couldn't got reassigned. Or watched. One refused the sign-off. We called him Ghost." It didn't mention my grandfather's name, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was about him. The next morning I drove out to Pulaski. I didn't tell anyone, just got in the car and left. It was a 4-hour drive. Quiet roads. No traffic. The kind of trip where your thoughts get louder the closer you get. When I got there, I found the site from the article. It was nothing now, just a fenced-off patch of weeds behind a gas station. But something about standing there made my skin feel tight. Like the ground had seen things it wasn't supposed to. An old man came out of the gas station while I was looking around. He asked if I was lost. I told him I was just curious about the fire that happened there back in the 50s. He looked at me real hard. Then he said, "What's your name?" I hesitated. When I told him, he squinted at me. Then he nodded. Slow. Like he recognized it. "You look like him." I didn't know what to say. He told me he remembered a soldier who used to come through town. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. Had a scar down the side of his neck. Didn't talk much, but bought the same paper every Tuesday. He didn't fit in, the man said. Didn't want to. I asked if he remembered the fire. He nodded again. Place was locked from the inside. No one was supposed to be there. But somebody made sure certain boxes didn't survive. Not all of them, though. That was all he'd say. When I got back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the letters. The journal. The scar the old man mentioned. I went looking for pictures. Old albums. Family photos. But there weren't many of my grandfather when he was young. Most were after he met my grandmother. But in one, tucked in the back of a dusty photo sleeve, there he was, maybe late 20s, standing next to a Jeep. And on his neck, just visible below the collar, a thin scar. Same spot. He was Ghost. Whoever that anonymous poster was, they weren't lying. He said no. He didn't forget. He watched. He recorded. And he left the truth buried in a drawer. I still have the journal. I keep it in the same drawer with the same false back, just like he did. And some nights when the house is quiet and my son is asleep down the hall, I sit in that room and think about how much he carried and how close I came to asking. But then I remember the way he looked at my son that day, like he was letting go of something, and I wonder if maybe the truth wasn't mine to hold. And now I can't stop thinking about this one thing. What if giving me his name wasn't about remembering, but about warning me not to become him?